On Earth, we are all prisoners. In many ways, the cosmos is teasing us by showing us places that we will probably never get to see. But since we first landed a man on the moon, it has appeared that the sky is the limit. But what if that statement turned out to be true? One of the most thrilling and difficult endeavors that humanity has undertaken is possibly space exploration. However, history ironically predicts that the more we venture into space, we might actually stop ourselves from leaving our little blue rock. But we need to break out of our prison if we wish to glimpse beyond the stars. The question remains though, what is caging us here? As everyone is aware, everything with mass attracts other things with mass. This is what we call gravity, our little friend. The closer you are to a large portion of mass, the greater the attraction, or the more you're pulled in. In essence, this influence keeps us bound to Earth. So basically, we're imprisoned in a massive gravity well. It's not a literal well, but it's a useful metaphor to grasp how this works. On April 12, 1961, however, we successfully used Sputnik 1 to become the first humans to escape this gravitational prison. Since then, we have sent several rockets and satellites into orbit. But what if we told you that as more satellites and rockets are sent out into orbit, whether deliberately or unintentionally, we are building a more deadly and dangerous prison for ourselves? Additionally, it may spell the end of the space era and keep us here on Earth for decades, or perhaps centuries. So, what exactly are we talking about? Let me introduce you to something called space junk. The term space junk describes the parts of a space system that are still there but are no longer needed. It might be a satellite that has outlived its usefulness, such as the International Space Station will when it ceases to be operational in 2031. Or it could be components of a rocket system that have served its purpose and are destroyed. It may also be used to describe tiny objects like paint flecks or debris that have fallen off a rocket. Some space debris is a consequence of collisions or orbital anti-satellite experiments. There can be a lot of new debris produced when two spacecraft crash, since they can shatter into thousands of new fragments. Although it's uncommon, numerous nations, including the USA, China, and India, have practiced destroying their own satellites with the use of missiles. Numerous new harmful debris pieces are produced as a result. Since the 1950s, when the space era began, we have launched countless rockets and placed countless satellites in orbit. Many of them are still there, and as we launch more, the likelihood of a collision grows. As we have seen through Elon's trials and errors, it is really difficult to send something into space. You would need it to travel extremely fast in order to get anything up there. First, it would have to travel straight up to exit the atmosphere, then sideways to begin orbiting the Earth. Still, very, very fast. And if you're successful in doing that, voila, you're in low orbit. Aside from that, leaving orbit is quite difficult. If you run out of energy, you are locked there and will likely fall around the planet for eternity. And when you want something to remain up there, like satellites, it is actually not a terrible thing. However, this same benefit might also be a double-edged sword. What do we mean by that exactly? Well, rockets are simply very large cylinders designed to hold fuel. So, once the fuel is depleted, the empty tank would be dropped to assist the rocket in retaining light. You might wonder what happens to that empty tank. Well, some of them fall to Earth, and some of them burn up in the atmosphere, but most of the worthless parts are still in orbit. We can see some instances since earlier this year when there were two different cases of space debris crashing back to Earth in unexpected areas. Following the discovery of certain spacecraft fragments in a rural area of New South Wales, Australia, in July, which has now been proven to be from a SpaceX Crew 1 mission, a Chinese Long March 5B rocket made an uncontrolled re-entry over Malaysia. And since this is nothing new, it's reasonable to predict that as the space sector develops, accidents like this will only happen more frequently and present concern. There are currently roughly 2,000 operational satellites circling the Earth, along with 3,000 defunct ones that are scattered across space. The US Space Command is also currently keeping track of close to 35,000 objects in low Earth orbit, a 22% increase from only 2 years ago. This debris is orbiting Earth, crossing its orbit many times every day and traveling at speeds of up to 30,000 kilometers per hour. Being struck by debris the size of a pea at orbital speeds is comparable to being fired by a plasma rifle. How crazy is that? So far, China has launched 3 Long March 5B rockets, each of which was deliberately placed in an erratic orbit. This implies that it was impossible to predict where they would land. Concerning the SpaceX trash discovered in Australia's snowy mountains, SpaceX carefully deorbits their rocket pieces and constructs other sections so that they will burn up upon re-entry into the atmosphere. However, as the most recent news demonstrates, these things don't always go as expected, and we may expect more of the same in the future. We are nearing a tipping point as the number of satellites and garbage in orbit is predicted to increase tenfold over the next decade. We now welcome Mr. Elon Musk. Some may question what he has to do with us being prisoners on Earth when his objective is to take us to Mars. That's simple. We can thank Starlink for that, which, according to rumors, will one day connect the whole planet to the internet. However, this video is not about that. Rather, Starlink may be championing and speedrunning us to be locked on Earth. To explain how this might be an issue in the future, let us introduce you to Kessler Syndrome. Kessler Syndrome. The Kessler Syndrome is a possible situation in which Earth's orbit is overcrowded with objects and trash, blocking satellites from operating in specific regions of Earth's orbit. In this case, collisions between objects in orbit continue to pollute space because they produce more debris, which leads to additional collisions. Okay, let us paint a picture for you. The explosion of a dying spy satellite causes a swarm of debris in Earth's orbit to wreak havoc as it zooms around our globe. With each catastrophic impact, the cloud damages a number of communication satellites, creating more and more debris. It destroys the famed Hubble Space Telescope and a NASA space shuttle, killing numerous crew members on board. It then zeroes in on the International Space Station, demolishing the $100 billion orbiting laboratory with a storm of fast-moving debris. This dramatic scenario is hypothetical, so don't panic just yet. It's taken from the 2013 sci-fi thriller, Gravity. However, many satellite engineers, mission planners, and exploration enthusiasts are concerned that it may be a gloomy window into the future. The argument has become more popular recently as a result of prominent organizations' rising interest in space operations. Several large firms, including Amazon, SpaceX, OneWeb, and Apple, are said to be planning to launch tens of thousands of artificial satellites into orbit during the next decade. This has the potential to accelerate a scenario similar to the one outlined in Kessler's idea. According to Science.org, Starlink, a subsidiary of SpaceX, has the most satellites in orbit. So far, the business has launched over 3,000 satellites, with the ambition to launch 42,000 more in the future. Isn't that insane? As of April 2022, there are about 5,500 active satellites in orbit. Although we are not yet at the stage where they will collide, astronomers across the world began aggressively raising the alarm about the large number of satellites and space debris orbiting the Earth in May 2019, when Starlink launched its first 60 satellites into space. And as we mentioned earlier in the video, even when everything is done correctly, human error is still possible. And to be honest, the concern that many scientists have is justified, because the worst thing that could happen to us is a chain reaction that never stops, turning a lot of things that aren't junk into junk. We'd have an interstellar domino effect, with each impact generating additional projectiles. As additional satellites burst, it will finally destroy everything in our orbit. The situation in orbit is quickly deteriorating, and we may have passed the tipping point. Within the next 10 years, the orbit surrounding Earth may be unsuitable for lengthy satellites or rockets. This is already happening on a smaller scale, with scientists noticing the Starlink satellites obstructing them. Oh, now that we've established the scenario for you, imagine the type of barrage the debris would form around the Earth, which means goodbye moon bases and goodbye Mars expeditions. So, do you believe it is too late, or do you believe we have nothing to worry about? Let us know in the comment section below.